Welcome to the Woodstock Effect, how 3 days of peace, love, and music defined philanthropy forever. I'm Sandra Lintelman Delaripa. I'm president of Harvest Development Group and Blossom, e-learning for serious do-gooders. I'm joined today by one of our senior partners, Scott Selig, who'll be managing questions and other ideas that you type through. Today's workshop is in 3 parts. Number 1, understanding how Woodstock illustrated community and defined philanthropy. Number 2, correlating how the illustration of community can translate to your nonprofit. And then 3, applying that understanding to a case study to develop an eye for building a community of philanthropy like Woodstock in your organization. At the end of this workshop, you'll understand how self and tribe act as magnets to your community and why value and worth, belonging and impact play a big role in that. You'll be able to clearly identify the 5 components necessary in your framework for community, and you'll be able to identify the specific actions, tactics, and tools to help facilitate building and operating your community.
The Woodstock Music and Art Fair, the 3-day Aquarian Exposition at White Lake and Bethel, New York, will give you uncomplicated, unhurried, calm days of peace and music.
More than 200,000 followers of pop music and jams in Catskills, Mountain Hamlet, and Bethel for a rock music festival. Cars are being abandoned on highways leading to the resort area. Festival producers have called for all vehicles heading to that festival to turn back home.
You people that have placed tents in the viewing area, please do take them down so that those behind can view as well. This is where facilities and schools return responsibility to you.
One thing about us is we're a pretty big city right now, so we've got all sorts of things. Richard Bach, get back to Eddie Kramer, the sound of Richard Bach, get back to Eddie Kramer.
Before we begin, could we ask you please once again to leave the towers, and then in the same breath, thank you for making all this possible.
So I want to take an audience poll right now. How many of you attended Woodstock? I would have loved to have gone. I was 7. How many of you have heard of Woodstock? How many of you, like myself, consider yourself a Woodstock aficionado? And how many of you right now are going, what is Woodstock? So some history. Musical Art Festival, Woodstock Music and Art Fair, August 15th to the 18th, 1969. 500,000 people on 37 acres of fields and hills and woods in this little town of White Lake, or Bethel, in upstate New York. It was deemed an ecological disaster by many and a state of the emergency by the state of New York. It lost a ton of money during the event. It was in debt for years, decades. But it's also one of the largest and most iconic experiences embedded into American and maybe even global history. It continues to make millions annually on residuals from movie and music and merchandise. It has a devoted following that visit annually and actually showed up by the tens of thousands for the 50th anniversary in 2019. It was originally conceived as 3 days of peace and music for 50,000 people. In addition to the music, the festival, which actually lasted 4 days, was set up with campsites and food booths, arts and crafts villages, social and ecological group displays, a children's playground and petting zoo, medical tents, and merchandise booths. As we noted, the event was actually a disaster financially. It was a ticketed event, but delays due to 3 separate moves of the proposed venue around various upstate New York towns left the producers with a really tough decision 3 days before the event was to open. Choose to finish the stage or choose to build the fence and ticket booths. The stage was essential. So it became a free concert for lack of fencing and ticket booths, and millions, therefore, were lost. Sometimes when I think about it, it reminds me of the galas that I used to have to operate. So how did this disaster that started out as a music festival produced by a head shop owner, a music executive, and 2 trust fund babies out of New York turn into this iconic experience that anchored itself into the fabric of our history? Those 4 rain-soaked, poorly resourced days over a weekend in August in the sleepy upstate country of New York somehow became a classic representation of community. How did this Woodstock experience community become a model for building that culture of philanthropy? That's something that we're going to explore in this workshop. So we often hear that term, build a culture of philanthropy. But what does that really mean? How do you go about doing that? Well, we know that the word philanthropy literally means love of mankind. It's a state of being. It is an existence. It's not an action. It's an experience. It's a feeling. It's an unifying emotion. The result of this philanthropy is action. It's giving. It's assistance and sharing and support. It's guidance and direction. It's encouragement, and on and on. The Woodstock experience was a community that evolved philanthropy, which evoked action. It was that unicorn of philanthropic culture that we all chase down. It was a state of being that engendered action inspired by the love of mankind, the love of people around you. It was a community that was nurtured, albeit chaotically, and through this nurturing, it grew its philanthropic response. But how do we go about building such a community? Community can't be forced. It can't be performative. It can't be created. It's not a society that you create graphics for and lots of material and assign some core values to and then put it up on your website and invite people to participate. Community is a force. It's a joining of like-minded people. It's magnetic. It draws people to it. People are attracted to community in these 2 ways, for self and for tribe. So self is that realization of what you personally value and find worthy. What is it that's valuable to you? What values do you hold? How do you identify and express those values? That's your self. And what do you find worthy of your time? When we talk about self, when we talk about worth, it certainly is about worthy of your investment, but also your investment of other resources, not just money, your time. And often when we are making those worth decisions, especially around time, it's an either or. I'm either going to do this or I'm going to do that. So that value and worth statement, those considerations are really important to individuals who are drawn to community. They're filtering the promise of the community through those two self-realization concepts. The second piece of creating this magnetic community and what people are looking for is tribe. And tribe is that sense of belonging to a bigger effort, being part of this larger whole and having this collective impact. It's bonding with other like-minded people and seeing yourself in others and that feeling of brotherhood or sisterhood and unity in that. In terms of Woodstock, the Woodstock community magnet, the individuals attracted to this community, the ones that made that incomprehensible assembly of 500,000 people work, had a unified value. They valued music, they valued art, they valued peace. These were all of the promises of this experience, this Woodstock festival, that resonated with individuals who held that as value. And then they also found a sense of belonging in being together with others that were like themselves. The promise of this weekend offered them the opportunity to fulfill their tribal need of belonging, to be with like-minded people, to experience this with others that held the same values and would enjoy and appreciate and participate in the same things that they held valuable. So let's pause for a minute, and I want to ask some questions. Feel free in the chat to write out your answers. But let's first think about some of the communities that you may belong to. Communities are the basis for our culture. To exist, a community must answer those two things that we just talked about. Does the community fulfill something that I value and find worthy of my time and my resources and investment? And do I feel like I belong in this community? Do I trust the community to respect and honor me, to include me, and to embrace me? Here are some of the communities that you might recognize in your own life. And as this list evolves, you'll notice that maybe you belong to 2 or 3 or 4, or maybe you can identify exactly how many of all of these you're involved in, and they happen to be all of them. Community not only needs to answer those two things, the value and worth of the community to me, as well as the opportunity to be in a tribal union, in a community of like-minded people. But on a more personal basis, the community that I'm drawn to has to make me feel like I belong. So what are some of the things that communities that you're a part of do that make you feel like you belong? And more importantly, what are some of the things that your communities do that make you feel like you don't belong? As you're building your framework of community for your nonprofit, keep this in mind. It's very easy to lose sight of the fact that the members are what makes up the community, not the leadership. And the members need to be represented, but they also have to be able to feel that they belong, that this is a community worthy of their time and resources. So we talked about communities can't be forced. They can't be built in such a way that people are invited in just because they exist. They have to be created in a way that people are magnetically drawn to them. And the way that people are magnetically drawn to them is by the promises the community makes through their marketing and their communication. So being really clear about what the value and worth of your community is to the members that might be interested. And since the community can't be forced, we're left with the question of what else do we do besides communicating what we're promising? What is it that we're going to accomplish? Well, we can build and operate a framework to nurture community. And that's essentially what they did at Woodstock. They created this framework that the community members then used to evolve their philanthropic feelings through the 5 core components that we're looking at here. All communities share these 5 essential components, and in the next few slides, we're going to go through each one in a little more detail. So first and foremost, all communities, all community frameworks depend on and are created for people, not companies, not foundations, not government agencies. People are at the core of the community. But not just any people, your people, people that find what you are doing in your organization. And we're going to talk about purpose in a little bit, but people that find what you are doing in your organization or what you're promising fits with what they value. They find you valuable. Spending their time on you is valuable. Being with your valuable thing is worthy of their time. It's worth their investment of resources, of not doing something else to be a part of your community. It's very important to realize that your community has very specific participants. And one of the things I want to point out, and we're going to repeat it later on, is the people in your community are not defined by your parameters. They're not major donors. They're not donors. They're not annual fund donors. They're not grateful patients, right? Those are your parameters. The people in your community are defined by what they value and find worthy, and what their desire is for this belonging. Let's keep that in mind. The remaining 4 components in all communities that you can build to facilitate this communal experience are shared purpose, and this is about what I value personally, as well as the value of what the community does. So 2 different reflections there, a shared purpose, what I value about what you're doing as an organization, but also the value of what you're doing as an organization. There may be 2 or 3 organizations that have the same value to me. They may all be serving premature infants. But my next decision point in whether I want to be a part of this community, whether I'm magnetically drawn to it, is how valuable is what they're doing? What is the value of what each of those organizations is doing? So shared purpose is really important. The other thing about shared purpose that we'll illustrate later is you may have an overarching shared purpose, but there may also be some sub-purposes in there as well. So thirdly, so people, shared purpose. Thirdly, shared experience. These are group engagements that inform the community on the value and worth, on the purpose, on the tribe, on the self-realization. These bond and unify, and they establish that unique community flavor, that unique community structure and visual. Then you have shared resources. And this is more than sharing from members to the community leaders. Certainly in a nonprofit, a shared resource in an evolved community that has that is expressing its philanthropy is a shared resource of money from the members to you. But it's more about members sharing between themselves in unplanned, facilitated, and spontaneous ways. And then finally, there's trust. And this trust is built through consistent and intentional communication. This will be something that we spend quite a few slides on because this is important. So let's look at how this evolved in the Woodstock community. And let's start with the first of the 5 components, people. Well, we've already talked about the community magnet of Woodstock. What attracted people to it? Music, art, peace, others like them. right? So when we look at the people in the 5 components of Woodstock, when we look at the people and who the people were, it wasn't corporations or business organizations or agencies. It was the right people. It wasn't my grandmother. It wasn't my aunt who was getting married. She could have gone, but her worth statement was, do I stay and prepare for my wedding in 2 weeks, or do I go to the concert? It was people that were attracted to the promise that the marketing and communications team at Woodstock made, which is 3 days in this bucolic setting of nature with nothing but music, a variety of music, with the beauty of the woods and the fields around us, with art, with activities, with other people. They were very clear, and because they were clear, they did attract all the right people. I'm sticking on this point because too often we think that the universe is our pool to pick from, and everyone should and could be our people. But that just creates confusion and obstacles that doesn't allow the right people to hear you. So as you're building this framework, you're thinking about your community magnet, the self and the tribe. Also think about who are the right people for you. What value do they share? What are they attracted to? Where are they? You'll notice in this list of young people, musicians, artists, and environmentalists, we don't say major donors. We don't say annual fund, right? Again, it's defined, your people are defined by what they find valuable and worthy. Okay. Shared purpose. Shared purpose in the Woodstock community was primarily around music, all kinds of music, folk, pop, some psychedelic rock. Believe it or not, though, the majority of Woodstock attendees were not the hippie freaks of the day. They were actually kids from New Jersey with hair down, above their ear, pressed chinos,
This is the largest group
but they all
of
shared
people
a
ever
love
assembled
of this
in one
purpose,
place.
of this gathering, this
The
music,
important thing that you're
nature,
proving
freedom,
to the
peaceful
world
coexistence.
is that 500,000 kids, and I call you kids because I have children older than you are, 500,000 young people can get together and have 3 days of fun and music, and have nothing but fun and music, and I God bless you for it. 500,000 young people can get together and have 3 days of fun and music, and have nothing but fun and music, and I God bless you for it.
That was Max Yasgur. He was the gentleman who finally said, yes, you can host this festival on my grounds. And he got it. He got it right away. He realized the purpose of this gathering. So people, shared purpose, shared experience at Woodstock. It would be very easy and lazy for me to state that the entire weekend was the shared experience, and of course it was. But in a little pop-up city of 500,000, there were little sub-experiences being shared as well. So if we look back at the map of the actual geographic festival community venue, the site of the music stage was really quite small. It was that red circle. That was it. That's where the music stage was and the hill. There were many sub-experiences, though, being shared as well by the 500,000 people there, including planned activities like theater and poetry reading and crafts, but also unplanned activities, pond swimming, bathing, meditations, yoga, and others. This is really important to look at in your community. People participating in your planned activities is expected in a community that's drawn the right people. But when you start to see people in your community creating their own experiences with each other around your purpose, that's when you know your community is evolving. And that's what happened at Woodstock very quickly. The people at Woodstock felt this philanthropy of community so quickly that they were empowered to initiate and act on giving, developing, leading, and trusting and participating in experiences with each other in the spirit of the purpose of the community, peace, love, and music. So the fourth item, shared resources. Similarly, the philanthropy that quickly evolved within the Woodstock community expressed itself also in the sharing of resources between the members themselves. Certainly, they shared resources to the community leaders, the event producers, the staff, even the police officers. But they took it upon themselves and they acted upon this philanthropic culture that developed so quickly in the Woodstock community to begin to share resources among each other. When I gave this presentation last week, there was a very insightful observation, and that is the current pandemic, or the most recent, the recent pandemic. And the shared resources within there, the response that came, because we were having an unplanned experience as a community. And when I heard that, I thought, let me go back and look. So we looked back at our client base over the last 6 months, and really those organizations that were sustaining, that were moving through this more successfully, that had a outcry or an outpour of support and guidance and resources from their community, were those that had evolved their community to the point where members felt they could share with each other. These shared resources at Woodstock between members was a response to both need, food, shelter, rain coverings, but also a response or an initiation for enjoyment and entertainment and brotherhood, sisterhood, food, alcohol, drugs, and yes, even love. So now we get to the fifth part, and I told you we're going to spend a little time on this. Trust. No one can imagine how 500,000 people didn't turn ugly when the food and toilet paper ran out at Woodstock, when the torrential rains came, and when the drinking water dried up. But it didn't. And it didn't for a very particular reason. Communities cannot thrive without this last component, trust. Being trusting, someone who trusts others, and also being trustworthy, someone whom others can trust. These two trust factors are essential in community. Now we know that building trust usually takes a very long time, but they didn't have that at Woodstock. They had to build trust quickly. And so to build trust quickly, you must employ consistent and intentional communication. Intentional meaning the information and the communication has a purpose, and consistent meaning that it's regular, that it's routinely delivered, that it has a pattern to it. At Woodstock, these three gentlemen were charged with building that trust among the 500,000. Chip Monk, that is truly his name. Well, Chip is a nickname, but Chip Monk, John Morris, and Wavy Gravy, whose real name is Hugh Romney Jr., and a little aside, he's actually from West Hartford, Connecticut, in my state. These three men were the voices you hear consistently over the microphone, the stage announcers. The delivery of their information and the pattern of their information was intentional. They were there to keep people informed between sets, to entertain, to engage, to be heard, to keep people heard, to keep people listening, to keep people alert, aware, responsive. That's what intentionality builds. It builds this community that's listening, that's eager to hear from you, that's eager to listen, that's eager to respond. They know what you're going to say has value to them, and that's self-realization. And they know what you say is going to come in a regular schedule. A community that has this type of intentional and consistent communication begins to feel seen. They feel important. They feel meaningful. They feel heard. Remember when I asked you of the communities you're in, what do they do that makes you feel like you belong? And what do they do that makes you feel like you don't belong? I bet you for most of you, one of the things you said was communication. That's how important this is to your framework for community. If you don't have this intentional and consistent communication, you're not going to have the trust. You're not going to have the trust in you, in your information, or in the promises that you make. And that can be detrimental to evolving that philanthropic emotion that will then result in action for you. Great. So we've looked at Woodstock. We've looked at the 5 components: people, shared purpose, shared experience, shared resource, and trust. We've also talked about the community magnet, that self and tribe that has to be represented in our messaging and our communication. How does this translate to your nonprofits? Well, let's take a few minutes to walk through that. Self, value, and worth. Is what you're doing valuable? Is it valuable to me? Is it worthy of my time and my resources? And tribe. Will I feel like I belong in this community? Will I feel like there's an impact in this community? Honestly, if you start here and do nothing else, and only really focus on the concept of community magnet and understand fully the value and worth of the member, of what members feel is valuable and worthy about you, and how they belong, and focus on making them feel like they belong, you really would have a good beginning of a strong community. This is really critical and where you have to start. But you also should evolve your community with these other 5 components. So let's start with people. How many of you right now in your community, in the listings that you used to have about your community members, list out corporations or agencies or foundations? Even if you have a Business Alliance for Community Health, which is a program that we had started once in a hospital I was running. You may have companies in there, but they're people. People are at the core. And we know that people will need to find you valuable and worthy, so attracting the right people is critical. Shared purpose. Well, like Woodstock, your shared purpose is your big picture, right? Your mission. But you could also have these sub-purposes in place, especially if you're a larger organization. Or even if you're a small organization, you may think your purpose is to represent stray animals, but you may have some sub-purposes in there that people are attracted to, and that's why they're in your community. Your job is to find out what that is. What are people finding valuable and worthy about your community? So your sub-purposes could be impact that you're having. It could be a social need or a spiritual need. Or it could be an affinity like your alma mater, your college, your hospital that you had service in, maybe even your neighborhood. In your organization, you will have shared experiences. And I'm going to tell you right now, this is why galas and golf events can't go away. Because for many of you, and for many of your boards and your committees and those that are closest to your organization, these galas and golf events are the only thing that represent a shared experience with your community to them. You know, too often our organizational communities look a little bit like this. All of the shared experiences are happening inside. They're happening with your clients, or they're happening with your team or other nonprofit staff, or maybe committees and boards. You're working on new and exciting things, but the community is not involved in that. Your community is on the outside and you're expecting them to support all of this. In order for your community to work, this has to come together. Your community must feel that they are in an experience with you, that their experience is in community with you. So your shared experiences certainly could be your programs and services. It could be your events, your advocacy, things that you support. It would be wonderful, though, in an evolved community for your members to begin to create these shared experiences. And we're going to talk a little bit about that in a minute. Then we have shared resources in your nonprofit. Now, certainly the expression of philanthropy in a well-developed community is sharing of the financial resources from its members to you in donations. But a truly evolved community will see that its members share between themselves. So your job in facilitating this, because again, you can't create this, you can't force it and make it happen, but you can facilitate it. So how do you facilitate members sharing resources between themselves? Well, be prepared to allow and to guide members in their expression of philanthropy through their sharing of resources with each other. So for instance, do you communicate how members can share resources with each other? Do you have ways for your community to share resources with you and with others that don't include money or board work or committee work? A very simple example is third-party fundraising. Do you have a program for third-party fundraising that is structured, that people know how to participate in, that people in this third-party fundraising program community feel as if they belong and that they're having impact and that they can share their experiences in third-party fundraising with each other? How did you do this? How did you do that? Oh, we have this tent over here. We'd love to share it. Facilitating that is the work that you can do in cultivating this community. And then finally is trust. And I'm going to tell you right now, trust is the hardest for most nonprofits to establish and manage. It takes a lot of work. It does require full attention from a person or a team, either in your community as a staff member or a volunteer. Critical to trust, as we've talked about, is that this intentional and consistent communication must be authentic and meaningful. That means a lot of work to figure out what that is. What is intentional to your particular community here? What is it that you're going to deliver to them that has meaning and purpose, that inspires them, that they can share, or that they should act upon? The communication must be authentic. Members, they really can feel unintentional communication. They really can feel when you've delivered something to them just for the sake of completing a task, checking off a box. I mean, imagine if Woodstock had someone that was scripted, who came on stage and read from the papers. No, the stage communication there was vulnerable. It was real. It was filled with information that was usable, that was shared, that stirred feelings within the community, and that ultimately inspired philanthropy that caused all those actions that we've talked about to happen. So we recently worked with one of our clients, helping them analyze and assemble a framework for their community. This is our first pass. When you work with this framework, and we're going to give you some tools to do that, you're going to do it 3 times. So the first pass is just the brain dump. It's that everything I could think of, there's no wrong answers, let me throw it into these different pools. The second pass is what I call proof of theory, validation. Okay, I threw this in here, is that real? Does it really happen? Is it an experience? Is it really a purpose? And then the third pass is when you get real. The third pass is when you say, okay, what are we capable of doing regarding resources and our abilities? What do we have the capacity to do? And how will this impact the community? What value does it bring? So this first pass with this client, which was an early childhood collaborative, looked something like this. Now you'll notice under people, again, we don't have donors, we don't have companies, we don't have businesses, we have people. We have people, we don't have donors. We have individuals who are of a demographic that care about parenting and education in early childhood. And that includes parents, educators. It includes physicians of certain sort. The shared purpose that we were able to elicit was based on a review of their community. So we looked into their community, we did some surveys, we did some one-on-one interviews, we looked at past engagement of their community with the organization. And we really determined that of all of the purposes that they had, that they were working with in the collaborative, parenting and education were really the strongest emotive responses. This is what people valued the most, what they found worthy and wanted to belong to and felt that they could impact or have an impact by. Then we looked at their shared experience, and timing is everything, of course. We did this during the pandemic. And so most of this was unplanned experiences. There were planned experiences that were in daycares that we could leverage or that we could see as opportunities for this community. But most of this was around the COVID pandemic response with regard to early childhood, daycare, health, masks. We looked at what shared resources and how to share these resources, right? So the bottom two quadrants here. So the members in this collaborative had a lot that they could share, both with each other and with the collaborative. So we started out by setting these weekly video calls where we would invite the people that you see on the left here in to these discussions. And they would be facilitated, they would be topical. And in this way, they were able to share their ideas, their frustrations, their issues, their successes with each other. We also created a private Facebook group so that they could continuous communication, continue to share with each other throughout the week in between these video calls. And then we invited the members to actually share with the collaborative leadership, share materials that they were using. And the collaborative then, we created a wrapper that had a unified look. And the collaborative was able to filter through, what members were offering, and then put it in the wrapper and send it back out. That lent to the communication, the consistent and intentional communication that we were building over here in Trust, which had to do with daily briefs. And again, these were 1 or 2 bullets at the most. And honestly, if there was, and the regulation, the rule was, if there was nothing that was meaningful to share in that daily brief, we just wouldn't send it. But if that became a pattern, we knew that we had to go back and look at this framework and proof again whether that was going to be a valid communication, consistent and intentional communication tool we were going to use. We did weekly news engagements, we did video emails, and we set up a YouTube page. So we're going to break you out in small groups now into the breakout rooms. And we have a case that we've supplied that we want you to practice on. And I made this case fairly simple. We know some of you have much more complex systems, and we're not promising that you're going to leave this workshop with the ability to do it perfectly. But we want to give you an opportunity to kind of stretch that muscle a little bit. Along with the case, there's a question and answer document. I've put it into chat. I think it's also downloadable somewhere, but it's in chat. Use that to fill in and then create this framework of ideas. In your small groups, would someone please read the case, and then somebody else take control of reading the questions. The small group will answer the questions, and the person that's reading them could scribe the answers. Because then we're going to come back and we're going to share. And as you're thinking about the case and creating the framework, all 5 of these components, try to be unique. Try to think of something that you believe someone else won't think about. Again, remember, this first pass is just a brainstorm. There's no wrong answers. So we're going to give you about 10 minutes to do that. Community. It's the basis for everything we know. It's the center of our family and of our friendships, our neighborhood. It's what connects us. It anchors our purpose and our belonging. It's what humanizes us, and it's what creates philanthropy. Create an experience of community in your organization to evolve philanthropy and attract hundreds of thousands of members that would fly, bus, drive, and walk, as we're about to hear in a minute from a woman and her friend Flora. Members who would go through those lengths just to be a part of your community, who will talk about it and respond to it and live it still, even 50 years later.
Flora and I flew standby, $16 to New York City, and then we took a train to Monticello, and then eventually some buses, and we got a ride in a car. But eventually, when we saw that it was bumper to bumper, we just got out of the car and started walking.
Thank you very much. This is such an important part of your success in fund development. We wanted to take a step back and stop talking about email versus mail and online donations and solicitations. Stop talking about major gifts and capital campaign asks, and really get people back a few steps, back to the garden, so to speak, to fertilize and nourish the ground in which philanthropy grows, and that is your community. I hope you found this helpful. Our contact information is here, and we certainly would welcome a conversation if you have further questions. We both love philanthropy, we both love nonprofits, and our whole goal is to help you be successful. So if you have any need or questions whatsoever on this, feel free to shoot us an email or pick up the phone. We're happy to chat. Thanks so much.